Would you like an alternative to aliveness awareness? Again, the one downside of aliveness awareness is that it's too enjoyable. It's too easy to fall asleep doing it. In fact, by the way, it's an excellent cure for insomnia. Suppose that you're suffering from racing mind insomnia. You are tired, lying in bed, trying to go to sleep, but your mind is racing and it's impossible to fall asleep. There's no better way to cure that than aliveness awareness. If you focus on aliveness, your incessant thoughting will have no choice but to end. It's a great opportunity for additional practicing. There are, though, lots of other ways to meditate. Unlike aliveness awareness, most meditative practices are spiritual practices. Don't confuse spiritual with religious. Our word spiritual comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breath or wind. So etymologically, a spiritual practice is a breathing practice. Whereas in aliveness awareness, one focuses on the aliveness in one's body, strictly speaking, a spiritual practice involves focusing on breathing. There are many different spiritual practices, and there are even many different spiritual practices in the Buddhist tradition. That's good because there isn't one that works best for everyone. Classic zazen is one form of Zen practice. The Buddha lived in the Indian subcontinent about 2,500 years ago. Eventually, Buddhist practices spread to China, traditionally with Bodhidharma. Those practices merged with classic Taoist practices, and Zen was the result. Zen eventually spread from China to Korea and Japan, and in the last century or so to the rest of the world. There isn't just one kind of Zen spiritual practice. Even what is theoretically the same practice is differently practiced in China, for example, from how it's practiced in Japan. Zazen can be practiced as both a stilling and a moving meditation. Let's here just consider it as a stilling meditative practice. Whereas aliveness awareness begins with being still while lying on the back, Zazen begins with being still while sitting. Most of the different sitting postures used for Zazen involve crossing the legs. What's critical is to keep your knees lower than your hips. In other words, your pelvic girdle is tipped slightly forward, which keeps your lower spine in proper alignment for sitting motionless with minimum stress. That makes it easier to sit longer with less discomfort. Having taught Zazen to many Westerners, my experience is that any cross-legged posture is unnecessarily difficult. Adult Westerners tend not to be flexible enough. I therefore recommend that beginners start practicing Zazen using a kneeling posture. In multiple books, I've described in words exactly how to do it. It's done most easily using either a special cushion called a zafu or a meditation bench. Something like that is required to raise your torso to ensure that your hips are higher than your knees. A while back, I posted on YouTube a video in which I demonstrate the kneeling posture. If you go to https://www.youtube.com and search for kneeling meditation, it should be easy to find. It's a little over 9 minutes long, was posted in 2013, and last I looked, had over 14,000 views. Classically, the best sitting posture for Zazen is the fully locked, or so-called full lotus position. It's easy to find other YouTube videos for it, as well as for the other cross-legged postures if you want to try them. For the third time, permit me to emphasize that all such postures require that the hips be higher than the knees. So, to practice Zazen while sitting, become physically still by either using the kneeling posture or one of the classic cross-legged postures. How do you become mentally still? You'll focus on your breathing. There are 3 phases. First, silently count the inhalations and exhalations. As you inhale, think 1. As you exhale, think 2. As you inhale again, think 3. As you exhale again, think 4. As you inhale a third time, think 5. As you exhale a third time, think 6. Proceed in that fashion until 10 and then begin again. As you should have expected by now, it's very simple. The key is the same as with aliveness awareness. As soon as you notice that you are lost in thought, immediately resume counting. Also, as you should have expected by now, although it's simple, it's not easy. We are too thought addicted for it to be easy. As with aliveness awareness, I recommend beginning with just 5 minutes daily. Again, use an audible timer to prevent your thinking about the duration of your practicing. As soon as you are comfortable doing so, add another minute of daily practice time. Work your way up to practicing for at least 20 minutes in a month or two. 2 rounds of 20 minutes daily are better than 1. Eventually, if you practice daily and focus intensely on counting the breaths, you'll be able to go for 15 or 20 minutes without getting lost in thought even once. Do not proceed to the second phase until you are able to do that. There's no need to rush, 1 phase at a time. Second, when you are ready, proceed to phase 2. Instead of counting both inhalations and exhalations, count only exhalations. Inhale, and as you exhale, count 1. Inhale again, and as you exhale a second time, count 2. Proceed to 10 in this fashion and repeat. This is more difficult because the aid you had when inhaling on the first phase is missing. If it feels too difficult, just go back to the first phase for a while. Proceed to the third phase only after you are able to pay attention to your breathing without getting lost in thought for 15 or 20 minutes. Third, question your identity with each exhalation by silently asking who, as in the question, who am I? The purpose of practicing is to realize your identity, your true nature. Asking who is a way of keeping focused on that question. Ramana Maharshi is a sage who emphasizes this. The questioning must be done with your gut and not your head to be effective. In other words, if the mind supplies some thought or other as answer to who, you may be sure that that's not the right answer. It's just another thought. The right answer is the experience of alert, thoughtless awareness. It's the apprehension of being. Again, there are no forms in being. Therefore, there are no thoughts or thought forms in being. Practice this way, who is a natural koan. A koan is a spiritual knot that cannot be untied conceptually. It's a puzzle whose solution is beyond thought. Is it best to practice alone or with someone else or in a group? It's usually very helpful for beginners to practice with at least one fellow practitioner. If you are fortunate enough to have a friend or lover who will practice with you, excellent. What you don't want, though, is someone who is not committed to practicing daily. A serious injury or illness can rule out seated or walking zazen, but short of that, never skip a practice session. The potential problem is that it's not really good to become dependent upon someone else. After all, another person is just another transitory form. Still, it can be really helpful, especially in the beginning, and if that person takes it seriously, to have a spiritual training partner. Of course, if you have access to a spiritual master who is willing to guide you, take advantage of that. What if you don't? Read Roshi Kapleau's The 3 Pillars of Zen. He wrote it precisely to help Westerners who were interested in starting their own practice and didn't have regular access to a master. Then reread it and begin practicing as he recommends. It's not an accident that's been the most popular and influential book about Zen in English in the last half century. That's it. If you want to do zazen, you now know how to begin. I wish you well. Peace.